Alrighty, it's time to talk about my first South Park creepypasta, and it's about Cartman getting revenge. Hopefully he won't feed your parents in his homemade chili. I should explain now that I've been wanting to do this story for a long time, but since it was deleted back in late 2013 on the Creepypasta wiki, I was only able to find this story again by using the Wayback Machine to get the story from an earlier time. Now as for the story, I thought it was a pretty decent last episode pasta, especially since it didn't have any blood and gore in it. There's even a mention at the end that Cartman cuts open his stomach to get rid of some of his fat, and the only thing mentioned is the stomach fat, so that was really refreshing for me. And arguably, Cartman could be pushed to the limits if he was bullied enough. I mean, we all know what happened at the end of Scott Terraman Must Die. The only complaints that I have are that the protagonist deleted the episode immediately afterwards instead of showing it online or to the authorities or something, leading him to suffer as a schizophrenic. Also, the demonic card is thrown in every now and then, but at the very least it's only brief. In all fairness, the story was a lot better than I remembered it to be, and I'm glad to finally be doing a reading of it. You all know the famous adult television show South Park, right? It's very prominent with the teenage and adult population in the United States. Well, not many people remember the episode that was accidentally aired. It was in October of the year 2000, right when the show was getting very popular. Being 15 at the time, I was an avid fan of South Park. I just loved the offensiveness and the crude animation, but I don't like watching it anymore. It seems that every time I watch it, the episode and the horrible nightmares come back. I don't like recalling it. I remember that the episode aired in an awkward time. I was watching The Daily Show, and then after that, South Park was on. It was an episode that I had never seen because the episode on my DVR showed up as Episode 1000. I was confused by the name, but I just thought that my DVR had made a mistake. Sometimes they did that. I decided to watch the episode, thinking it was a rerun because the new episode was supposed to air 6 days from then. It couldn't have been a new episode. It started with a normal intro, then it cut to the schoolyard where most episodes first take place. It showed a crowd of people circling around something. I was also very confused because the animation was not that great. It was almost like the Spirit Christmas short that the creators had made years before. Then the camera panned to what they were circling around. It was Cartman. It looked as if Cartman was being bullied, but not like normal bullying. I couldn't tell because the audio was cutting up and getting all choppy, but then the audio cleared up almost instantaneously. The other children were unrecognizable because they were just stock children. The only knowable characters that were there was Stan and Kyle. Cartman was being thrashed and thrown around, and the other children were chanting, "Kill it fast!" The more he was getting thrown around, the more you could see that his face was being damaged. It was extremely detailed, almost scarily detailed. It then cut to Stan and Kyle. They were moving in real time, and then cut to a still image of them. Almost like somebody paused the video, but the sound was still going. You could hear Cartman's screams of agony and distress while the still frame photo was being shown. The still image of Stan and Kyle was of them just staying there along with everyone else who weren't taking part in the torture of Cartman. The expression on their faces were terrifying. Kyle had a demonic look in his eyes. Stan had a very hardened look in his eyes, almost like he was going to sob. As the seconds passed by, the sound was oddly cut off, absolutely silent. Then after 30 seconds, the sound cut to Cartman screaming over and over again. There was no crowd noise, just screaming. As the screams progressed, they got even more high-pitched and terror-filled. Then it cut to the video again. I was obviously disturbed at this point, but I was more confused than disturbed. Why would they air this? Was it like an episode that wasn't finished or something? The video was of everybody kicking Cartman out of the playground, one of them saying, "Now teach you fast." It then shows Cartman running to his house. He then runs up to his room and starts sobbing profusely. He then starts talking to his stuffed animals. He asks them, Why would they ever do this to me? What did I ever do to them?" His stuffed animal tells him to get him back, to make them feel the pain that he went through. He then says yes to his stuffed animal in a very monotone voice, almost as if a robot just spoke. He then says that they call him fat and tell him he's nothing but a fat-ass, so I'll make them feel misery. He then says to himself that his first victim would be Butters. He then goes to Butters' house and tells him to come over to his house because he got the new game system. Butters then agrees to go to his house. The camera then cuts to Cartman's basement. Butters then asks where the game system is, looking confused. It then cuts to a first-person perspective of Cartman behind Butters. It shows Cartman's hands with a crowbar in them. He then smacks Butters on the back of the head with a weapon. It cuts to Butters waking up, tied with his hands and feet bound. Cartman then says, "You all bullied me, so I will now bully you." It then shows Cartman smashing Butters in the face with a fire extinguisher. Again, the detail of the damage being done to Butters' face is immense. The audio then cuts out again, but for only 5 seconds. It then turns back on, but to a scream that didn't sound like it was coming from Butters. It was a very loud, ear-piercing scream. It had the tone of a grown man's voice. The scene then cuts to a photo of Butters' house with a caption that reads, "12 hours later." I am very terrified at this point. I was going to turn it off and try to forget about it, but I had to keep watching. It then shows Stan, Kyle, and Kenny at Butters' front door. They knock on the door, and Butters' father opens the door, and they ask where Butter is, and he says that he is staying the night over at Cartman's house. They go to Cartman's house. The scene cuts to Cartman in the corner of his basement sobbing. The audio cuts to a faint wind noise, then it cuts to a very loud sequence. It sounded as if somebody was playing someone's speech backwards, or as if somebody was speaking in different languages. The video cuts to a still frame of Cartman sitting there with an expressionless face, with the audio cutting to him speaking in a rippling voice. It was very faint, but then faded to a higher volume. It consisted of Cartman saying, "I killed him." It cuts to Cartman saying in the same voice, "God, God, 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 I'm gonna be with God soon." Then the sound cuts off completely. The still frame lasts for about 7 seconds. It cuts back to a scene where the 3 boys walk down to the basement and then see Butters' dead body. They scream in terror. Then they say, "Oh my God, Cartman, what the hell?" Cartman then says, "God made me do it." They freeze in shock. Cartman then runs to the top of the stairs and shuts the door and locks it. They all scream, "Let us out, you fucking psychopath!" Cartman then says, "God is telling me to kill you 3. You will reveal the fact that I got my revenge." They then scream in horror. They yell something, but it isn't audible. Cartman walks to his kitchen cabinet, the scream still being audible. He grabs lighter fluid and matches. He spreads lighter fluid around and throws the match and then quickly runs out of his house. The camera cuts to a fire truck in front of Cartman's house. The fire gets put out quick. Then police go and inspect the scene. It cut to them digging through rubbish. Then they dig up Kyle's body. The entire body was intact except for his face. His face looked as if a real person's burnt face was photoshopped into his face. The look of it was horrifying. It basically looked like a black skeleton face. It cut to Cartman crying in an alley. He then pulls out a knife and cuts it into his abdomen area. He pulls out the realistic looking body effect that flows out of the wound. He whispers to himself, "I'm no longer fat. I am now beautiful." He then starts laughing like a madman. The camera zooms out. He screams into the camera with a demonic look on his face. "I am with God now," he screams. It cuts to the normal credits, then to normal programming at the time. I was very distraught after what I just saw, not wanting other people to see what I just witnessed. I quickly deleted it off my DVR. The staff member that made the episode was never found or discovered. I tried to forget about the episode, but the nightmares started coming to me. I was so bad out of shape because of the episode that my mother checked me into a hospital with mentally ill people. 4 years later, I was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I now reside with my mother. She always looks after me to make sure that I'm alright. I constantly think of that episode. I never stop thinking about it.